J.K. Rowling doesn't link to anything she's read or give any citations, which makes it really hard to feel assured that she's actually done her research when she just says, I've read some stuff, especially when most research in the field supports the existence of gender identity and the validity of trans people, and disagrees with the trans exclusionist points that cis women need to fear trans women, or that men pretend to be trans women.
We actually came across a great graphic that says, when you debate a person about something that affects them more than it affects you, remember that it will take a much greater emotional toll on them than on you. For you, it may feel like an academic exercise, but for them, it feels like revealing their pain only to have you dismiss their experience and sometimes their humanity. The fact that you might remain more calm under these circumstances is a consequence of your privilege, not increased objectivity on your part. Stay humble. J.K. Rowling might be fueling her professional interest in the debate on gender identity, but her interest in and subsequent influence over the attitudes towards trans people causes an immense amount of pain and distress to people who are actually trans and who are now having to defend their rights to people who, before Rowling shared her views, were either neutral or just didn't care. They were oblivious towards trans people's existence. But they're now seeing trans people as a danger and an ideology, and that's not right. If a large group of trans people are telling you that something is wrong, please listen to them.
I think this is really damaging to people's mental health, and it stymies a lot of genuine conversations that we could be having. I think I'm out here about to say, like, you do not have to have top surgery as a trans masculine person in order to be really trans. That is a huge investment of money. You're putting your body through something traumatic, and if you feel pretty okay about your chest already, like, you could be inviting more problems. I like my chest enough that it's possible that if I got top surgery later down the line, that I would end up remorseful, at least in some ways. It would make my life easier. Like, undoubtedly, it would make my life easier. That is a fact. However, I don't think that I'm willing to go that far, basically to make other people less shitty to me. Like, I don't know how else to put this. My comfort in my own body is more important to me than how other people perceive my body. And I think that a lot of binary trans people feel that exact same way about the fact that they are going to get surgery. There are TERFs out there who will tell you that you've mutilated your chest, but that doesn't matter to you. What matters to you is that you feel comfortable and whole in your body. I, as a non-binary person, have very different feelings about my body than a binary trans man would. Thinking of you, Calvin. My transition as a non-binary person has been very non-binary. It's been very non-linear. I have been on hormones and then off hormones, and now I am on hormones again. I have done things to make my facial hair grow faster. I still consistently shave my legs, and I'm looking into other types of hair removal for the newly arrived ass hair. I spend a lot of time thinking about bottom surgery and learning about what kind of surgical results are possible, and not to go into any kind of detail, but it is far more likely that I will at some point in my life have bottom surgery than it is that I will have top surgery, based on what I have learned about myself during this quarantine process. Like, I don't feel dysphoric about my chest when no one is around. It is almost entirely because of those pressures of wanting people to gender me in a way that is less harmful to me. It is harmful to me to be gendered female. It sucks to be gendered male, but in some ways that feels like the closest thing I will get to acceptance in broader society, which still doesn't really have room for non-binary identities. You know? At the same time, in isolation, I am thinking about genitals a lot, okay? And like, even that isn't necessarily a dysphoria thing. That's a whole conversation that we can have some other time. I also want to be clear that my feelings are subject to change. They always are. They always have been. I have always given myself this allowance for knowing that maybe being on T is right for me right now, but it might not be later. And when I was off T, I was like, this is right for me now, but I might go back on T later. Depends on how I feel about my body and what I want from my life, basically. So at this moment, I don't have any intention to get top surgery. I don't need top surgery. I don't want top surgery. I am happy in my body as a non-binary person. I don't always necessarily feel like I am attractive, but I think a lot of people struggle with this, and it may or may not have anything directly to do with like being non-binary. I really hope that this doesn't result in even more trans people coming after me to tell me that I must not be real, that my experience must not be real. Like, my social dysphoria is a very, very real thing that sucks a whole lot. My body dysphoria fluctuates and right now is pretty stabilized because, again, I'm transitioning in a non-binary fashion and I'm very okay with that.
She said accusations and threats from trans activists on Twitter. It started when she accidentally liked a tweet instead of screenshotting something to look at later. People took her like as evidence of wrongthink, and she's been low-level harassed ever since.
You know what? Whether it was an intentional liking or not, J.K. Rowling is perfectly entitled to like, tweet, support, do whatever she wants on that Twitter platform, including supporting trans exclusionist views. And regardless of what someone's views are, and whether you agree with it or not, threats of abuse are absolutely never okay.
The trans community has valid arguments against trans exclusionist points, but threats really weaken this. And we 100% do not condone this kind of behavior. However, it's only a minority that act this way, and we can't take that wrong behavior of the minority and group it onto the majority who do not behave in this way. We've spoken to people who have shared articles saying, oh, look how horrible trans people are being. And there are literal collections of screenshots of trans people or trans allies saying very negative things about J.K. Rowling. Of course, those tweets are not cool, but it's also not cool to collect them and act like this is all that's happening.
In under 5 minutes, I could collate so many horrific screenshots of what trans exclusionists have said to Jamie. He receives these every single day. He's been called so many things.
Delusional, an idiot, a f***ing freak.
And he's gone into periods of genuine depression from feeling super invalidated by people attacking his literal sense of being.
A f***head, a freak show, a f***ing pretend dress-up person, batshit crazy.
When all he wants to do is live and pee in peace.
Insane, a human that ruins America.
I receive it too. I receive verbal sexual assault threats from men for just being with a trans guy, and this is as a cis woman.
A dick, a dishonest, misogynistic, homophobic twerp.
Neither of these sides are innocent.
In all honesty, I've received pretty much no calm responses to my viewpoints from trans exclusionists. Instead, I receive a torrent of hate, shouting, and illogical attempts to belittle me and invalidate my gender. I personally have not thrown threats anyone's way. I simply rebut points with facts, and I explain why they're wrong as a trans person standing up for trans rights. And based on the back of Rowling's words and other people encouraging these views, I have received so much hate. Thankfully, more support, but the hate has truly been vile. So yes, J.K. Rowling, I feel your persistent low level of harassment. I can genuinely say I experience this on a daily basis.
But no one can justify their transphobic views by saying that trans people and trans allies are being mean. People on both sides are mean, and regardless, if you said the gender identity doesn't exist and someone calls you a bad word, you're still saying the gender identity doesn't exist.
It is okay for them to be who they are. You are trans. If you know that you're trans, you are trans, and you don't have to prove that shit to anybody. You don't have to drop $10,000 fucking dollars on top surgery in order to be valid as a trans person. Like, seriously, it's expensive, it's difficult, and sometimes, like, if you're trying to navigate through insurance, it can be grueling, heartbreaking years of waiting for approval and jumping through hoops and trying to find a surgeon whose results you like and who is within the network of your insurance. Like, it is incredibly difficult to go through this process, and I just want you all to know that you don't have to do that unless you want to, unless you need to. It is up to you to decide what aspects of transition are right for you and which ones are not going to end up being fulfilling and making you happier.
Really want to know what negatively impacts trans well-being, including trans youth? Here are some facts for you. Attitudes towards trans people are more negative than towards LGB cis people, and trans people are subjected to anti-trans prejudice and social stigma. Trans people are at a greatly increased risk of suicide, but early referrals to gender clinics reduce this suicide risk. Trans people also have poorer well-being compared to cis people. Misgendering trans people leads to increased depression and felt stigma. The amount of misgendering and stigma that I have seen flying around in the wake of Rowling's essay is incredibly sad. And this is literally the type of behavior that negatively impacts trans people's well-being.
In my opinion, J.K. Rowling is old enough and, thoughtful and educated enough to feel a certain way about something and to say it. I believe that J.K. Rowling is completely within her right to express these things. I think that she has the right to go onto Twitter and say that she thinks that sex is real and that everyone who has a menstruation cycle is a woman. I think that that is her right. She can say that out loud and proudly, right? But I don't think she gets to say that and somehow not be transphobic, right? The truth is, I've known so many people like J.K. Rowling, right? I've known so many people who on one hand say that they support and love transgender people, but on the other hand say that their identities, their lived experiences, how they experience gender is not valid.
Hi friends, so we're back again. We were on here today and talking about this issue, and we had a few people asking questions at the time, and that was really great. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the live stream that we've got going here. So Dee Dee River is here with me again, and Dee Dee is going to start until we get some questions. We may not get some questions in the live chat. You've got your mic on, haven't you, Dee Dee?
I do.
So we may not get some questions, but we've got questions here just in case we don't. So Dee Dee, the first one here is, how does a person know they are trans?
Okay. People don't necessarily know that they're trans, especially when they're young, especially if they are living in some place which is very conservative and doesn't actually get a lot of information about being trans, or very much, positive information about that. They may not know. They will, however, feel unhappy. They will feel something is wrong. Elizabeth Riley, who I've mentioned before, who's one of the prime gender counselors in Australia, talked about children, and she was asked, how do the children know that they're trans? And she said, basically they don't, because children are children.
Right.
But parents can pick up things like they see the children kind of persistently wanting to wear clothes of the other gender, want to be referred to as a boy or a girl when that's not what is on their birth certificate. Want to might say things like, why did God make a mistake with my body, or things like that.
Right.
And parents, if they're sensitive at all, can figure out there's something going on there.
Yeah.
And that's when they might take some sort of action.
Right.
Now, what kind of action the parents take depend entirely on the parents.
Right.
I mean, they can either try and suppress that, tell the child that you're not allowed to do that. Boys don't do that. Girls don't do that. Here, wear this dress.
Right.
Put a dress on now. You don't go running around. And but the children will either try and suppress it or not. But if they're trans, they're liable to be very unhappy.
Right. Yeah.
If it's suppressed. If
Right.
they're allowed to just be, and be however they are, which is probably the best thing,
Yeah.
then they may show signs of being transgender. And schools, when they get to a school, they may, schools may pick it up.
Right.
If they do, sometimes they might talk to somebody like Elizabeth Riley, and the first thing she does is make sure the parents are involved.
Right. Yeah. Elizabeth Riley is in Australia, isn't she?
Elizabeth Riley
Who
is
is
in
who is
Sydney.
Elizabeth Riley?
Dr. Elizabeth Riley.
Right.
She's worked with transgender people and young transgender people for the last 30 years, thereabouts. She worked with the Gender Center for a number of years as the counselor.
Right.
And yeah, she's been on Sky News. People can Google it and see little bits of things she said, or 60 Minutes.
Uh-huh.
We won't put that up because I think it's only on Facebook at this point.
Right.
But what she has to say is very interesting.
Yeah. Now, shall we go to this next question, which is, can...
Okay, I wanted to just say, because that's the situation for children. And children usually get identified as trans when they take a very strong binary position and are fairly dysphoric. They feel like the gender they're assigned is not the right one, and they are the other one. And that's usually what happens when children are identified.
Right.
When kids get older, particularly when they get to be around puberty, they know a lot more. They have a lot more information. And you may see a lot of kids at that point becoming very uncomfortable with what may be happening, or what they are afraid may be happening with puberty.
Right.
And at that point, you may see other kids come forward and say, I'm trans.
Right.
And the kids may at that point assert that they're trans.
Right.
Because they have agency, they're of a reasonable age, and so on.
Yeah.
And so you get a whole nother group there. And at that age, you may find a number of people, quite frequently kids in their early teens will say, I'm trans, and then maybe a year later or something decide that they're not quite trans in the sense of being binary trans, but they're non-binary.
Uh-huh.
And so you see a lot more kids who are coming out as non-binary around 14, 15, and
Right.
they may have come out as trans before that.
Right. Okay. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that, and you might have noticed there was a YouTuber person in the intro to this live stream. Luxander is the name of the channel, and they are very interesting, and you should go check them out. So this
Non-binary.
non-binary, they're non-binary. So this next number 2 is, can anyone be trans?
Okay. Basically, the answer is yes and no. I mean, if you are trans, you're trans. And anybody might be trans, but if you're trans, you're trans. If you're not, you're not.
Right.
It's a bit like...
You just know it.
People talk about, and this goes back to the first question, people talk about being trans like being left-handed.
Right.
If you're left-handed and you're made to use your right hand all the time, it just feels wrong. But when you start using your left hand, it feels right.
Right.
And being trans is a bit like that.
Right. I see.
And same thing. Anybody could be left-handed, but not everybody is left-handed.
Right. So the third question here is, how do children know they're trans, that they are trans?
Okay. I think I partly answered that one.
Right.
That small kids don't. Older kids are liable to have some information about that. Now, another worldview is possible, has asked, how do we distinguish between trans and non-binary? And basically it's not distinguished, because being non-binary is part of being trans. Being trans just means that you don't identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. And that non-identification with that gender may mean anything on a big spectrum. Non-binary people are trans, binary people are trans. Yeah, it's not an either or.
Right.
Trans is an umbrella term for both.
Yes. Yes. So in this number 4, is this a new phenomena, being trans?
No.
We covered that a bit earlier in the live stream
Yeah.
about 5 hours ago.
Being trans is a new phenomenon because up till then people didn't call it trans. I mean, you see various debates, in the Stonewall riots and that kind of thing, or the Compton riots. They talk about the trans people being involved very strongly, and kind of leading those early queer efforts at activism. But, when you
Excuse me.
look at that, those people didn't identify as trans because transgender wasn't even a term at that time. They would identify, Marsha Johnson, for instance, identified as a street transvestite, meaning that she dressed as a woman, she lived as a woman, she was working as a sex worker. But a lot of people today would say she was trans.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly how she herself identified.
Yeah.
Because those terms weren't there.
Yeah.
Same thing. I mean, historically, you have things like the Two-Spirit people, the Hijra people in India, the
Thousands
various
of years,
Polynesian
basically.
people,
Hey.
people everywhere. I mean, basically, there have been people who are gender diverse. I'll use that term. Everywhere.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's been accepted, sometimes it hasn't, sometimes it's been more accepted than other times.
Yeah.
Quite often, trans people or gender diverse people were honored. Most cultures outside of the Anglo-Saxon one actually recognized as a gender that trans people or gender diverse people existed. Yeah, there wasn't a denial of that like we see in more modern times.
Right. So this number 5 is, why are so many people afraid of trans people and trans issues? Why do trans people make people feel so uncomfortable?
Okay.
I'm not everybody is uncomfortable, of course, but
I'm being accused of reframing and changing the question. You asked how I distinguish between trans and non-binary people. I told you there isn't a distinguishment. The non-binary people are part of trans. You then said, or just a stage of development like polymorphous perverse. I don't believe in polymorphous perverse. I'm sorry. I disagree with that framework.
what does that mean, Didi, if you can explain that, Paul? You don't have to.
I'm not going to go
Okay.
into that. There's
All right.
enough stuff about trans to talk about.
Okay. So let's get back to this this question, which was why are so many people afraid of trans people and
or
trans issues? Yeah.
I think trans people make people feel uncomfortable because it raises questions about gender.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes people feel very uncomfortable if they have any questions about their own gender. It makes people feel less secure. It's like if they believe their world is neatly divided into men and men are men and women are women and never the twain shall meet. One is from Mars and the other is from Venus.
Yeah.
If that's your framework, anything that questions that makes people uncomfortable. It's just like sexuality. If people believe that heterosexuality is, like men are attracted to women, women are attracted to men. That's just the way it is.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this is the kind of language you hear from transphobes quite often. And
Yeah.
that's just the way it is,
Yeah.
But it isn't.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
isn't that way.
Yeah.
And that makes people uncomfortable. And I
Yeah.
think that's why, I think there's also
Any
the-
challenge of the binary basically
any challenge of
is
the
sort
binary.
of
Plus, there's the reinforcement of all of those organizations and institutions which are patriarchal, which really depend on that,
Yeah.
those binary definitions.
Yeah, there are definite sort of dominant paradigms on this planet, like white people trying to maintain control. You know, sort of the
Yeah.
binary. This, you know, it's got to be that and nothing outside of that. It's this constant demonizing of the other, basically,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, so how can parents, number 6, how can parents tell when children are just emulating someone from online, or if they are truly trans?
Okay, well, first off, what age are you talking about, children?
Oh, I'd say
Yeah.
maybe say between 5, 6, 7.
Well, 5, 6, 7, basically the only, sort of response, or the best response that people have for people at that age group is to let them be socially and let them be who they want to be. If it's a phase, it will disappear. Yeah. There is no medical intervention
Yeah.
on children before puberty, unless, of course, they're intersex.
Yeah.
If they're intersex, of course, they start interfering with them from birth.
Yeah, right.
In order to enforce some sort of binary gender.
Yeah, and we talk
thing.
about that. We're going to
We'll
talk about that
a
later in
little
another
later.
question.
Yeah. But if they're of that age, then you do nothing. You let them be.
Yeah, yeah.
You let them experiment. You let them try things out.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if society would just let people be?
Yeah.
Instead
yeah.
of like
It's
freaking out.
It's just diversity.
Freaking out and corralling them into these little sort of stereotypes.
There's another wonderful little story that about a mother who took their 4-year-old or 5-year-old, I think, a very young child who was in daycare, to get some shoes, and they saw these shoes which were girls' shoes, and they were striped slippers, and
Oh, yes, I know this story.
They loved those shoes, and they said, "Mom, I really want these shoes." And she said, they're girl shoes. And she said, "I don't care. I really love them. I want them." And the mother was very concerned, but she'd heard about trans things. And after a lot of pleading, she bought the shoes. The little boy wanted to wear them to day school.
Right.
And she said, "Well, are you really sure? They're girl shoes, And I said, "No, I love them. I want to show them off." And she said, "Well, why don't you just put them in your backpack and have some other shoes?" I said, "No, I want to wear them." And she ultimately let the child wear them. And when the child came back, said, "Oh, it was great. All the kids loved my shoes and stuff." And the mother sort of thought, "Oh, maybe my child is transgender." And she said, "Well, you could wear other girls' clothes if you want." He said, "I don't like them because they're girls' shoes. I like them because they're striped, and I love zebras."
That's right. Yeah, really.
And it's like, it shows the assumptions people have.
Yeah.
People, like Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, had this thing, let kids be kids, meaning enforce gender norms on them.
Yeah.
What really, if you're going to let kids be kids, let them be kids. Let them do what they want.
Yes, really.
Yeah.
And so how can, hang on a second, what is the difference between sex and gender?
Yeah.
Did he? Yeah.
Okay, sex and gender. This is usually an academic distinction. This is where it came from, although it's been weaponized and is increasingly being weaponized. The difference between sex and gender is sex is seen as biological and gender is seen as social. But all of our interactions with other people are based on gender. Yeah. Recently, we've seen, people like J.K. Rowling insisting sex is the important thing.
Yeah.
Gender is that's just something else. Like people can
Right.
call themselves whatever gender they want, but sex is real.
Yeah.
That's not quite correct anyway, as we'll talk about later. But the main thing is that all of our interactions, including the legal, relate really to gender.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even if the law says sex, the law means gender.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in practice, that's what it is.
Right. Right. So let's see. Where are we up to here? Okay. So why is calling people by their preferred name, preferred pronoun important? This is why is calling people by their preferred name pronoun important. Sorry.
Well, I mean, if your name is William and somebody calls you Susie, are you going to be happy? Probably not. If you say, no, my name is William, and they say, okay, Susie,
Yeah.
Particularly if they say, okay, Susie, well, I'm just going to keep calling you Susie because I think you're Susie. Well, that's aggressive.
Yeah.
That's not a mistake.
Yeah.
That's not an error. That's not, oops, I slipped up. That's aggressive.
This is also where there's always this fear-mongering about, if you misgender somebody, you're going to go to prison or something like that. And in the very small...
Jordan Peterson started that one.
Yeah. And really, what that particular case that people usually point to, I think it was in the UK, I think it was a teacher who was continually misgendering a student that the teacher knew was, I can't remember, was it a she or what, and they were doing it as an antagonistic sort of a,
and it's a situation
and
where
he didn't go to prison, I don't think, the teacher.
No,
but I mean, I think he got sacked because it was basically bullying in a way, wasn't it?
Yes, and it's a situation where the teacher is in a position of power over a student.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to abuse the student in that way, to single them out and basically be abusive, is discriminatory.
Yeah, that's right.
But most of the things, I mean, it's like Jordan Peterson made a huge issue of gender and was giving including trans people in anti-discrimination legislation will mean people are going to go to jail. Parents will go to jail by misgendering their children once by accident, and that's nonsense.
Really.
And basically nobody has gone.
Yeah.
It was included, I think the issue was actually hate speech. And hate speech is actually a very specific thing. It's something which has to be generating hatred against a group for their existence. And it has to be done in public and intentionally. And the test of it is whether any reasonable person would see, this is at least in Tasmanian law, that any reasonable person would see that as that kind of an action. It's not up for somebody to say, "Oh, that was bad," And in practice, you have situations where, preachers have, street preachers in Launceston, notoriously transphobic and kind of attacking and cursing trans people as they walked by, and people took videos of that and tried to get something done, and they lost the case because of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And so in practice it's actually really difficult to make any kind of case, even when it should be perfectly clear.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that's really just fear-mongering, really, when people keep bringing that up. So let's see. Is it harmful to confuse children with unending gender options?
No. I mean, basically, I think it's like, is it harmful to confuse children by allowing them to think about what they want to do when they grow up.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
endless options.
Yes. Yes.
Let's not confuse them. You're going to be a nurse.
Yeah, yes, yes,
Um,
yes. Which is what happened to me.
Yeah.
You hardly any
Yeah.
career choices except nursing and teaching
Yeah.
at my school.
And your mother actually just took you in and enrolled you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
yes,
I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous
I think it's
thing.
harmful. Not, I mean, you don't. I mean, for many, for a long, long time, there's not even any mention of gay people or and the trans thing was just not nowhere, was it, Didi?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's like when you don't even sort of, it's like it's completely invisible and at best, and at worst, demonized. It is so harmful to children because you grow up in a
Non-binary people still have a terrible time.
Oh yeah, they do totally.
Being recognized and being accepted or acknowledged as non-binary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of them, like Luxander, is non-binary, but knowing that people will put them in a binary category says, well, if you're going to make that binary category he, but their preference, their gender is actually non-binary, and their preference is they, them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I might get you to read the next question because I might put something visual on so people just aren't staring at questions.
Okay.
How does that sound? You've got
Yeah.
them in front of you, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I might just.
Let's see, where are we? What do you say to the idea that trans men are contributing to the erasure of young lesbians?
Oh yes.
Well, I would say that it's kind of ridiculous. Basically,
That's a new one. They come up with some excellent.
It's like lesbians aren't being erased. There's plenty of lesbians around.
Yes.
But it also ignores the nature and history of lesbian culture. And that history includes a lot of gender diverse people. And it also neglects the fact that where gender stereotypes have been pretty rigidly applied to men and boys, they're really pressured to meet those, you're a sissy, you really get abused. Boys really get abused if they're not, being masculine and rugged and whatever, tough enough.
Yeah, yeah.
And girls have always been more allowed to be a tomboy or sporty or some other sort of thing. And particularly since, the 60s and 70s with feminism, women can wear almost anything. I mean, the idea of a woman cross-dressing as in what?
Yeah.
Women wear suit coats, women
Yeah.
wear pants,
Yeah. And sadly, unfortunately, men
Here in Tasmania, virtually all women wear pants.
It's sad too, and like generally speaking, men are still sort of. Look at Candace Owens just recently on Twitter complaining about Harry Styles wearing a dress, or it's so sad that what is the problem with that?
Yeah.
Really, what is the problem with that?
What's ridiculous is, men wearing a dress. Oh, that's terrible. But if men wear a kilt, well, that's manly.
Yes, exactly. I know.
If men wear a dress, that's horrible. But men wearing a galabea, or one of those other Arab robes, well, that's just culturally normal.
Yeah.
And manly.
Yeah.
And it's mindset.
Not the actual.
It's
it's not the actual outfit. It's what people put on it.
It's what people. Yeah, it's the social meaning of
good
those
heavens,
outfits.
Seriously, if are we that threatened and sort of so insecure about ourselves that we have to have these signifiers like a dress, and heaven forbid it should be on a male body, and that
Yes.
somehow means
Yeah.
it somehow, because a lot of this has started through the Christian Presbyterian thing, hasn't it, Dee Dee? Was
Yeah.
that back in the
Yeah.
a few hundred years ago?
Oh yes,
The sex negative stuff.
men's
Men used
costume.
to wear lots of all sorts
Yeah.
of things.
High heels started with men. Basically
Yeah.
they were riding boots, and
Yeah.
they had very high heels, and
And
men,
pretty
men
wigs.
were peacocks.
Yes, and pretty wigs and makeup.
Yeah.
And
And
fans.
really flamboyant colored costumes, and you go back even a little further, and you had the party colored, the different colored legs with bright cod pieces, and they were real peacocks.
Yeah, really. Yes.
And in some ways that's almost a natural thing.
Well, yeah, I mean but it's really crazy that
Hi, Kim.
it's really crazy that it's, I mean, that used to be the case, and men used to dress like that in England anyway, in the UK.
Yeah,
and it was
Prince,
totally fine.
Prince did that.
What,
that was
Prince?
Prince, the singer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he was fabulous.
Yeah, and there are, there's, I mean, of course there are young people around that are addressing however they want, and that's great. But in general, it's still frowned upon. In the corporate media, it's still highlighted because drama, they love drama. And, like I say, Candace Owens, who unfortunately is a sort of a self-hating black woman who wants to conflate socialism now with feminization of men. I love the way they're so desperate, the corporate media and the far right and even and the corporate Democrats and all of those are all trying to conflate socialism with the end of humanity, socialism with the end of feminization, of men, all kinds of ills and stuff. It's truly incredible.
During the marriage equality debates and stuff, all of a lot of the argument from
Kim.
the no, gay people shouldn't be allowed to be married side were, if you let gay people be, then the next thing you see boys in dresses, boys in dresses.
Yeah.
They never complained that we'll see girls in pants because that ship had already
But they
sailed.
don't complain about men going overseas and killing people they don't know for resources and hegemony.
No,
like
no.
soldiers. No, that's fine.
Well,
that's totally
manly.
fine.
That's manly. That's
Yeah,
alpha
but
male
isn't that
stuff.
amazing? That's okay.
Yeah.
But a man in a dress, oh heavens above, the humanity is going to fall apart. And
the real tragic thing is when you see those men going off to war, you often get like that recent thing with the SAS where they were talking about the war crimes and the horrible kind of hazing and initiation things where they had them slit people's throats and do horrible things to people.
Yeah.
And this is, in a sense, to prove their manhood.
Yes. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
And that was...
And it behooves the military-industrial complex to keep men
to keep that going.
In that, yes, to keep that going, to keep that the stereotypes, the male stereotypes of not non-emotion and all that kind of thing. Keep that going so that they become fodder for war. They become like
little boys' clothes always have like skulls and knives and
really.
All this sort of stuff.
Yeah, really.
Some
It'd be
symbols of
interesting.
violence, basically.
It'd be interesting to see how children grew up without all these without all the
all the social conditioning.
Yeah,
and that kind of ties into the next question, which is the gender binary stereotype constructed? Of course it is. And if so, what's that mean? And why has there been a construction of a binary gender? Well, I think patriarchy is one of the main reasons. It goes back to the essential rise of patriarchy, which was when agriculture and came in and things were more settled. There was a push for conquering each other's territory, although that existed even before, even with hunter-gatherers. And the conquering of territory, well, it was mostly done by men, and so they have these warrior cultures. And a lot of tribal cultures, many of them were matriarchies or matrilineal, and the women's roles were much more important and separate but equal in many ways. And there were third gender or fourth or fifth gender roles as well. But that warlike thing always was part of something. And you look at something like even the Lakota tribe with Crazy Horse. And Crazy Horse was made a peace chief, where part of his job was to try and bring the community together as separate from the war band leaders. And they had some of those structures, which we seem to lack. And this whole push from the incels with alpha males and that kind of stuff. I mean, you look at what is an alpha male? Generally a big, tough, brutal, guy. Who can beat the shit out of anybody else. And that's an alpha male. And that's almost the definition of it. But is that what you want all males to live up to, or try to live up to, or feel like they're second class? I mean, that's ridiculous. Aside from the fact that all that alpha beta thing, really came from some biologists' study of wolves, and later on they found that even wolf societies don't exactly work that way.
Right.
And then people tried to apply it socially. But I mean, Butler talked about the social construction. Judith Butler. And in Gender Trouble, and she was looking at with women, like, where does this whole notion of gender come from? And the way it's imposed from a very early age. And gender is, as a social constructed thing, was in part seen by the anthropologists even before that. And the reason that they saw it is because the roles of different gender differ in different societies. And so it's clearly not something that is innate. It is something that is socially constructed. Because it's different in one society from another. And there are different social rules. But kids, from the womb, now we have these bloody gender reveal parties.
Oh, yeah. Really.
Where even before they're born.
Forest fires,
they've
darling.
set a couple of major forest fires. There have been huge accidents and so on.
And the woman who actually started those gender reveal parties is actually regretful.
Incredibly
that she did.
depressed. And
Really. Where were we up to with these? Sorry,
well,
I didn't have them in front of me.
That's number 11.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay, I'm working on it.
Oh, sorry,
We're talking about that there. And
sure.
Why has there been a construction? Patriarchy, I think, it suited.
And can you speak to the idea of, what the research has indicated about male children being, that particular stereotype put on, children, like, say, male children, for example.
Oh,
children born as male.
I think that has been, studied, and when children take on those extreme gender roles, particularly the boys being tough and kind of sporty, and I'm not intellectual, I'm no egghead, I'm not interested in art and all that kind of stuff. And often getting into drinking and stuff at an early age, going out with girls, the idea is to have a lot of sex, and the girls are into makeup and dressing up and finding a good boyfriend and that kind of thing. There's typical female stereotypes.
Yeah.
And the outcomes for those people are significantly worse than kids who don't do that extreme stuff. There's higher levels of alcoholism, of substance abuse, of suicide, of teen pregnancy, of abortion, lower socioeconomic indicators later in life, lower levels of education, and a whole range of things. In fact, those extreme gender things are just bad for kids.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And Didi, have you finished with speaking to that question?
Okay. Well, I think so. I'll go on anyway.
Okay.
And I will also say, though, that like the sociological, while Butler is very interesting, the sociological approach is also very interesting of doing gender, which basically talks about gender as something you perform, but it needs to be kind of authorized by other people. You need to get that affirmation of the gender.
Yeah.
But within that sociological analysis, you can show those sort of gender things differently in different subcultures. Like, being a woman in a feminist circle might actually differ, or a lesbian circle might differ than in a straight circle, and that kind of thing, because the approval and interactions with your social group differ.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that.
Didi, would you recommend, say, Gender Trouble to somebody as something to read?
Sure,
or what would
but I would
that's
also
by Judith
recommend
Butler?
Judith Butler's later work.
Okay, and what would that be?
Well, I think some of the YouTube videos you talk about. I mean, she's
There's
done a lot
many
of stuff.
YouTube videos, and she's
worth listening to.
Yeah, she's very nice.
Yeah.
Judith Butler, just in case people aren't familiar.
I recommend that people read. Was an original article by Weston Zimmerman called "Doing Gender," and there's later been a book which also looks at the comparison of that and Butler's work,
right,
and goes into it in a lot more detail. And it's also called "Doing Gender." And then there's another book called "Doing Gender Differently." I've forgotten who wrote that or edited that. It's again a series of articles.
Right.
They're both, all three of those are really interesting.
Great. Great. Are there any YouTube videos on that particular thing?
I haven't
really
of.
looked.
I haven't.
Zimmerman.
I haven't looked for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the next question?
Okay.
I don't have them in front of me.
Can you go to prison for misgendering a trans or non-binary people? No, you can't.
We've already talked about that, haven't we?
You can go.
We've already talked about that.
Yeah, you can. Some of the people have claimed that they've, been, taken to court because they've misgendered people. In fact, like there's a case in England where, in fact, what they were taken to court for was claiming that a trans lawyer wasn't really a lawyer, and they were taken to court for slander.
Oh, really? The trans lawyer wasn't a lawyer? What?
Wasn't really a lawyer. They said they were a fake and all kinds of things.
Oh,
yes. Or there's a case in Oregon that's often cited by transphobes where the person actually was putting out pamphlets against certain people.
Right.
And they said that goes beyond. That's not misgendering somebody. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
But anti-discrimination legislation in most cases, it doesn't include any kind of jail term.
Yes. Yes. I've never heard of anybody going to jail for that. I've heard of people being reprimanded, and in that case where we talked about the UK teacher who kept on intentionally misgendering as a form of bullying a student.
There may be consequences. It's like Maya Forstater, the woman that J.K. Rowling was championing. I mean, she was let go. She wasn't fired. Her contract was just not renewed. because she consistently misgendered and insulted work colleagues and clients of the business. And, that just couldn't go on.
Right, yes. She
now-
was doing that, was she?
Yeah. On the
Oh,
other
wow.
hand, you have situations like in Australia, there was a Catholic couple, who were denied marriage. They were supposed to get married in a Catholic church, and they were denied it because she supported same-sex marriage in a Facebook, post.
Right.
And the Catholic priest saw that and said, well, if you have those ideas, you can't get married in a Catholic church,
Oh, okay. Geez.
and I won't marry you.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, this is, people talk about, but they never look at the other side of this sort of thing. They never
No.
look at the people who get fired. They never look at the people who get denied work, who get denied housing.
Yes. Who kill themselves?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm talking about just the general discrimination that,
Oh, yes.
people face, which often may cripple them financially and
Sure.
that kind of thing.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not uncommon for people to, if they're in the middle of transitioning, their
It's a
jobs are
terrible
made
time.
their jobs are made redundant or
Yeah.
something, so that the
Yeah.
organisation can get rid of them. I mean, it's really appalling, and that can be ruinous for people's livelihoods. And then they end up. A lot of people trans people can end up homeless.
Yeah.
And young trans people end up homeless because they get kicked out of home.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah, there's
ridiculous.
a lot of consequences
Yes,
to
there's a lot of
to
consequences.
transitioning.
Yeah, and it's meant to make it so that
Yeah.
it's a pressure that's meant to make it so
Yeah.
awful
Yeah.
that somehow that's supposed to
Yeah.
dissuade people
Yeah.
from doing that, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And that whole thing of social construction, I mean, Butler talks about it. It goes beyond just simple social pressure or what might be called nurturing. It actually goes into the structure of the whole society, and everything it does and how it's built, all of the frameworks and systems and so on, which create those kind of structures and reinforce those structures. It's not simple, it's like all of your interactions, all of the media that you see, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to have some representation of minorities of all sorts in the media.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the next question is, what if someone transitions and changes their mind?
And this is a great one because people like to cite this one.
People go on about people who have trans regret or transition regret or who have detransitioned and so on. I'll just bring let's see. There was a survey in 2015 of nearly 28,000 people, who transgender people, that found that only 8% of respondents reported detransitioning, and 62% of those 8% said they only detransitioned temporarily. The most common reason for detransitioning, according to the survey, was pressure from a parent, while only 0.4% of the respondents said they detransitioned after realizing transition wasn't right for them.
Yes.
The
Talk about
results of a 50-year survey published in 2010 of transgender people in Sweden found that about 2% of the participants expressed regret after undergoing gender-affirming surgery.
Right.
The numbers are even lower for non-surgical transition methods, like taking puberty blockers. According to a 2018 study of a cohort of transgender young adults at the largest gender identity clinic in the Netherlands, 1.9% of adolescents who started puberty suppressants did not go on to pursue hormone therapy, typically the next step in the transition process. I mean, hormone blockers are supposed to be something that gives young people a time to think about it. In most jurisdictions around the world, people can't take cross-gender hormones legally until they are 16, at least. Now, there have been exceptions. There have been situations where people have done it illegally, but legally, in almost all jurisdictions, 16 is the limit. And some people do change their mind, but I mean, I'm thinking of a YouTuber, Natalie Alexandra, who ended up, she came from a rural community in Utah that was very strongly Mormon. She realized she had transgender feelings. I don't know if she named them as that. I don't think she did, because the context socially wasn't there.
No.
In early childhood. And when she went to university, she thought she might actually, just come out and be cross-dressed, and she was mocked and abused. And so she went in fear back to a male role. She ended up working as a model and an actor, but after time, that just didn't work for her. And this is the problem with transgender people. You can pretend that you're not transgender. You can try not to be. And this is an interesting, I'll throw in something else. The U.S. Army looked at the fact that there were a number of transgender people who were coming to the veteran administration hospitals as transgender, wanting help with transition, medical help with transition. And so they did some study, and one of the things they found in the study is that a disproportionate number of these trans people had taken the most extreme masculine roles in the military when they were in the military. They were Navy SEALs and paratroopers, Green Berets, and SAS, because they were effectively, Chelsea Manning was doing that. They were effectively trying to, convince themselves that they were really men. And
it's tragic,
ultimately
really.
it didn't work. And that was the case with this, with Natalie. I mean, ultimately, although she was a very successful person and admired as a man, it didn't work. And so she transitioned. When she transitioned, she lost her jobs. She lost her income. She was abused by her parents. All of these sorts of things happened. And she was kind of miserable in some ways, although she was also very happy and felt like she had a community. But she was like innerly happy, but her outside world had collapsed. And after a bit, she thought, maybe I was better the other way. And she tried to do that, and she detransitioned. And took a lot of testosterone, and as she saw all of the transition, her electrolysis and stuff coming to naught, and all of the work on her body, she completely collapsed, and she ended up retransitioning. And at this point, 2.5 years later, she's actually quite happy.
That's great.
But I mean, it's like the only case I personally know of somebody detransitioning was someone who was about 6'2" or 3" and built like a linebacker. I mean, and they were transitioning to female. And they were never going to be passable. I mean, they were big, bulky.
This whole
person.
thing impossible is really sad.
And is really sad.
It's really sad,
But, I mean, it was the case, and so they were subject to constant abuse. They ended up finding somebody that they really liked and getting together with them. This was about 9-10 months after they transitioned. And that person said, look, I don't want to stay with you if you're trans. I want you to detransition. And they did. But in my opinion, they certainly didn't look happy about that.
Yeah, yeah.
And this goes back to this study I was citing. I mean, in most cases, people are not, they may detransition, but they're not happy about it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And a lot of people retransition.
And I mean, I don't think there's a big percentage of people that do that, really,
No,
is there?
no.
No, it's a small percentage.
Yeah,
And
it's a small percentage of people.
there was a couple of comments. Do you want me to read them out? A couple of
Sure,
recent
I'll
comments.
go back to the
Another Worldview
proper
Possible
page.
said that's a problem for cisgendered people too. I'm not sure exactly where in that was related to. And Kim said to that, yes, of course, however, we live in a transphobic world and not a cisphobic one, so no one gets rejected from their family for being cisgender, or no one gets rejected by their family for being cisgendered. Yeah,
no, they might get rejected by their family anyway for other reasons.
Yes.
And I mean, it's hard for cis people to try and live up to these gender stereotypes, and they're imposed by the
Yes, really.
And it's horrible.
Tell me about
You
it.
know.
I find
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I find. Well, I can't. It just doesn't
Yeah.
suit me to be. I've never been able to do the whole thing.
Well,
if somebody wants to go and do that whole what is considered feminine, then well, if that's what they really want to do, great. But who even knows what people really want to do when
what people really want to do? A lot of that's cultural conditioning.
Yes.
It's like because they understand that as being sexy and attractive or whatever.
Yeah.
But where did that notion come from? Yeah.
Yes.
And and that goes also back to that whole question about lesbian erasure. I mean, lesbians and frankly a lot. I've got the a lot of cis women have not liked the gender roles that they've been being pushed into.
Yes.
And a lot of women are gender diverse.
I had to laugh,
A
Dee Dee.
lot of them are gender non-conforming.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a lot of cis women who get misgendered,
Yes.
and not just lesbians.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I've been misgendered.
Yeah.
I mean, and just because I didn't fit into, because I had short hair or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's weird, isn't it? It's just sort of like, it's just. But anyway, I was going to say, I was watching the Jimmy Dore show the other day, and it was really funny. He brought up this picture of Kamala Harris in high heels, and it said something about sort of some powerful woman or something. And he actually started talking about the bizarreness of he was reading out some feminist sort of thing about the bizarreness of high heels and how it's almost equivalent to sort of foot bondage sort of thing. And like, why do you need to be? Why do women have to? In a position of power, they still have to wear these for goodness sake, men can button themselves up to the top. They just throw on a suit, and there they are. And women have got to spend, all this money on clothes and shoes and makeup, and it's just ridiculous.
What I find interesting,
and they still don't get paid enough,
is with the classic dominatrix, the woman who's powerful and whatever, wearing a corset and high heels and all this. Basically bondage, to conform to some male idea of sexuality. And another worldview says it's always possible something causes familial alienation. Could be a number of reasons, but some groups get their issues fetishized. I don't think it's fetishized.
Yeah, really.
When a father says to a trans child, if I ever see you again, comes to the door with a shotgun and says, if I ever see you again, I'll kill you. That's not fetishization.
Yeah. I don't know if
Yeah.
you're cisgendered, another worldview is possible, but I'm sure your family never came to the door with a shotgun and said, you're cisgendered, get the hell out of
Yeah.
here with a
I mean,
shotgun.
a lot of people, I mean,
Fetishize, that's funny.
primarily, like either families that reject their children often tend to be really staunchly religious or staunchly something or other, and very rigid with it. And if the children aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, then they're failures. But I mean, I find that's kind of a horrific thing. But of course, being any kind of queer has always been a reason to throw children out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and reject them, and I never want to see you again, and or
Fortunately, I was
marrying somebody from a different race.
Fortunately,
That's also
I'd
been another one.
Fortunately, I'd already come out by the and I'd already left home. When I was 23 when I
Yeah.
came out, in quotes, and my mother actually had a sort of a homophobic response and suggested I should go and see a priest or a psychiatrist, and just to make her happy I went to see a psychiatrist, but I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I never felt there was anything wrong with me,
Should have
and
gone
I
to a
still don't
priest.
think there's anything, certainly not in that regard. There might be other things wrong with me,
Yeah.
but that was never a problem, so
Yeah.
anyway, it's just sort of like,
Yeah, we're not saying broken families systems are monolithic.
No.
I mean, being trans is not the only reason
Yeah.
that families are stuffed up.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually think families are really problematic. Nuclear families. I think when people lived more tribally, it made a lot more sense because quite often you had a lot of other adults you could go to if your parents weren't very good parents.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Other people who would
You
look
were very
after
fortunate, weren't you, Dee Dee? You had
Yeah,
there was
I
a lovely
had
family.
friends' parents were
Dee Dee was
very
kicked out at-
welcoming to children who were a bit rejected,
Yeah,
and so I was able to visit there a lot of the time.
yeah, that was
Yeah,
wonderful.
and that was great.
That was really lucky.
I'm so glad that I
Yeah.
had that.
Sadly, Dee Dee
supportive-
came from a bit of your mommy was nice, but your father was
Yeah.
not so nice.
Yeah.
He was kind of abusive.
Yeah.
Okay, to put it mildly.
Okay.
So anyway,
Yeah. Does one have to transition at all? Does one have to take hormones or have gender affirmation? Well, I mean, when one says transition, I mean, if you're trans, that assumes, I mean, you're always trans,
yeah,
whether you've transitioned yet or not.
yeah,
Transition usually means trying to live a more authentic life, something that corresponds more
that-
to your heart and being.
is that the one you're doing
It's
on the
number
TV?
14.
Yep. Okay, go on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It means living a more authentic life, something that's closer to your heart, to your inner being, and like everybody should be living that way, not just in regard to gender.
Yes.
It's just gender is such a rigid framework,
Yes.
and for some people it really doesn't work. So transition is just saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. You have people like Luxander, who is in that video that you did in the beginning,
Yes.
who's non-binary, and they're always considering. I mean, I've known a number of people who transitioned in a binary sense, and then a year or two later said, "This doesn't really suit me either." I don't. Like people who are assigned female at birth, who said, "Well, I don't really fit. I don't really want to fit this narrative of being a man. That doesn't suit me either."
Yeah.
And so they become non-binary, and that's fine. I mean, but
Yes.
trans people, I mean, you have the example of a lot of older trans people.
Yeah.
In the old days, being trans was so heavily discriminated against. A lot of people didn't come to terms with it in themselves until they were older. Yeah, and reached a point where they really just couldn't go on with their life.
Yeah.
A lot of older trans people report that they hit the wall, that they hit the space where if they had to keep living in that gender role,
Yeah.
they would just rather not, and they'd rather kill themselves.
Yeah, who
And-
knows how many, suicides, how many
Yeah.
car accidents where people
Yeah.
run into bridges or off
Yeah.
bridges or off cliffs.
That
are
was
people
something a
that
number
could
of
not-
people talked about, actually, said they found themselves kind of aiming their car at a tree or
Yeah,
a bridge pylon,
yeah,
and he kind of said, hang on,
yeah.
and at that point started to deal with their gender issues.
Yeah, that's how serious it is. It's not some sort of flippant thing that
Yeah.
people just sort of think, I'm going to do this, and this will
Yeah.
be fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not fun. It's not fun all around, because look at the pushback
Yeah,
and
I mean,
the hatred.
I mean, children, it's like far from being encouraging. Most families are quite resistant, and even the ones who come to accept that a child is
Yeah,
trans,
look at
they come to accept it after seeing how much pain
yeah.
their child is in.
Well, look at Cher.
Yeah.
The singer Cher. I mean,
Yeah.
Bono, Chaz,
Yeah,
was. She had problems with it, and she's like a gay icon,
Yeah.
icon. You'd think that
yeah, Cher's a gay icon, and
you would
and
think
yet
that she might have sort of a bit
Yeah.
more of a. No, she had
No,
problems with it
she had
too.
problems. Yeah,
And oddly enough, it seems like Glenn Greenwald has problems with it, as we discussed
Yeah.
earlier today. I mean, we might be wrong, but I don't know. It seems very odd, and he did say something odd on Joe Rogan's podcast too. What was
Yeah.
that? Did he? He was
he
highlighting
just
something.
told the story about, like he had a couple of friends who, at least this is what he said in his article,
Yeah.
that he told the story of a couple of friends, one of whom had a child who was dating a trans boy, and another who had a friend who is trans, and both of them, I think, was 17, and both of them had had top surgery.
Right.
Now that's interesting. One of that Luxander.
Yes,
clip that you did.
I played some clips in the beginning while we were waiting
Yeah.
for people to come, and one of them is
Luxander,
Luxander.
who's
So if you missed
non-binary,
out,
was talking about the fact that
excuse me, Didi, just for a second. If you missed out on that beginning 10 minutes, please check it out,
Check
because
it out,
there's
see
some
it again.
interesting
It's-
from different trans YouTubers, and one of them is Luxander that Didi's just talking about now, who's non-binary.
Luxander, has a very small chest, and they were talking about the fact that COVID has meant that they spent a lot of time alone.
Right.
And they found as they spent time alone, their chest didn't really bother them,
Yes.
that they're okay with their chest
Yes.
in themselves. What they really can't deal with and makes them feel awful is when other people see their small breasts
Yeah.
and immediately classify them as female.
Right.
And they said, that is horrible.
Yes.
And that is what was pushing them towards surgery.
Right.
But COVID and spending a lot of time alone has let them reassess and say, this isn't me. I'm not uncomfortable with that aspect of
Yes.
my body. They are uncomfortable with other aspects of their body.
Yes.
But they said they're not uncomfortable with that aspect of their body. They're uncomfortable with the social response
Yes.
to that aspect of their body.
Yes. Yeah.
And so they're
Yes.
thinking seriously of not having top surgery.
And Didi,
And that doesn't mean that they're not trans.
No.
And they're, in that particular video, they actually go on to say, well, and there'll be some, trans people on Twitter and stuff who will be
Yeah. And there are parents that
critical of them, or
Didi, and there are parents that react to their children saying that they're trans, essentially, are only reacting in a negative way because, again, of social, sort of conditioning and social sort of,
Social reaction.
reaction.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Because it just all goes around and around,
Yeah.
Yeah, vicious cycle anyway.
A number of people are non-binary and are not taking hormones, or contemplating any kind of surgery.
Yeah.
They just behave and act and are often taken as people of the other gender,
Yeah.
the other binary gender, but many of them don't see themselves as either gender. They're non-binary.
Yeah.
And they may tend, like Luxander, one way or the other. Luxander is non-binary, but has a strong preference. They feel much more uncomfortable if people identify them as female than if people identify them as male.
Yeah.
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 Although they would really like to be seen as non-binary, but almost nobody does that.
No. Maybe in
society
time.
isn't built that way.
Yeah, maybe in time, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe hopefully when it's not Diddy,
Yeah.
hopefully when it's not an issue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When people can just be,
Yeah.
however they want to express themselves.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. The next
Okay.
question is, how easy is it to get gender affirmation surgery? And I have to laugh at that.
Right.
It's easier to get top surgery. It may cost thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
but it's easier. You can find more surgeons who will do that. But in general, no surgeon is likely to do that without, certificates from psychologists and so on, in part because they don't want to be sued.
Yes.
And even the ones who will are few and far between because a lot of surgeons just won't.
Yeah.
And when you come to any kind of genital surgery, there's really very few. I mean, in Australia, I think there are 2 surgeons in the whole country who will do male to female genital surgery.
Yeah.
One of them's very old.
Yeah.
And they require letters and, 2 years with a psychologist and all of this sort of thing.
In
and
Iran. It
costs something like $30,000, $35,000.
Yeah, it's very expensive.
Something like that, which for people who are transitioning, quite often they end up losing their jobs and they're really hard-pressed for money.
Yeah.
And so how easy is it, even if you want it, even if you can get the letters and the approval that would allow a surgeon to do that, people often cannot afford it and go for years before they are able to get surgery,
And
if they ever are.
Diddy? In
And
a
the
civilized
situation,
society.
I want to just say,
Yeah.
the situation for trans men is far worse. In order to get phalloplasty, I think there are no surgeons in Australia who do phalloplasty.
Yes.
There's a different procedure called medioplasty, which I think there's a couple of surgeons who may do that, but there are no surgeons who do phalloplasty here, so you'd have to go overseas. Generally, it costs over around $100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is for someone assigned female at birth who transitions and quite possibly might lose their job and whatever, trying to get this kind of procedure. Now, in England, you can get that through the NHS.
Yes.
In Australia, you can't get that through...
No. In a civilized society, it should be, covered by, like, as the US would call it, universal healthcare, single payer healthcare, or as we
Australia's
have
universal healthcare
Yeah,
doesn't
that's right.
do that.
No, it doesn't, and it should.
and
And
it should.
I expect that at some point it will, hopefully, unless of course it just goes.
There's pushes for
Unless
that.
it just goes more and more kind of conservative and stuff, which it's looking like it might.
Yeah.
Anyway, but we might get on. So what number are we up to now?
Okay, we're about how easy is it to get gender affirmation surgery.
If
Basically,
anybody, by
it's
the way,
really
hold on,
difficult.
Didi, excuse me. If anybody in the chat has any questions, please feel free to leave them.
Yeah.
We're just going through a list at the moment. Okay, Didi, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lorna, that's really
That's a nice thing.
absolutely.
Lorna thought, she says, what was that about?
Interesting and important information. Everything about gender conformity is nuts. Some of my most uplifting and inspiring moments in life have been in the presence of people living as they want to. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the great things with feminism is breaking the bounds, the rigid bounds of gender, so that even if a person is cisgendered and sees themselves as female, there's still a lot of diversity within that, where for men it's still pretty bloody rigid, and that's such a shame.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see, the next one is how do trans people generally feel when they're trying to understand why they feel different? It's really complicated, I think, and it depends. I mean, it's like young children, if they're allowed just to be, won't feel anything until they're told that they can't do that or they can't be that.
Yeah.
And then they will want to know why. They will feel unhappy about that. The more rigidly gender is enforced, the more miserable they usually are. With people, particularly in their teens, who come out as transgender, who haven't been showing that, hadn't had that real extreme dysphoria from childhood and that binary gender thing, when they are in their teens and realize that they're transgender or start feeling that way, quite often, what convinces the parents is the fact that they are self-harming. That they're doing cutting or really extreme things, or try to kill themselves. And there's been a few people who, only surrender to the idea that their child might be trans when their child tries to kill themselves.
Yes.
And they see how miserable they are.
Yeah, isn't that dreadful?
Adults, people will go on for years often. I mean, this is particularly true in past years when people didn't know as much about being transgender. Where people would try and live with these feelings that things are wrong. Quite often people who are transgender report that they just feel like everything is wrong and that they're just different and that they're crazy. I mean, I was talking in the earlier podcast about a friend of mine I know who just thought they were crazy. They had no idea why they felt the way they did. They felt that they were the only person who'd ever felt that way until they went. They lived in Queensland, which some parts of Queensland are kind of backwards. And they went to a psychologist and they said, you may be transgender, and it was the first they'd heard about it.
Wow. When was this?
This was
period?
In the, I think it was the early 80s.
Oh, wow, really? The early 80s?
Yeah.
Oh, aren't they lucky they came across a therapist that was like that?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
And
I wonder who that was.
What?
I wonder who that therapist was.
Yeah.
Because wowza.
And they suddenly went, you mean there's other people like me? And they said,
wow.
Yeah.
How amazing.
And that, it can be incredibly traumatic if, you see people who've gone into cross-dressing and with huge amounts of shame, and a really typical pattern is to cross-dress and to buy, clothes and this kind of thing through the internet or one way or another, and then go into a complete shame and take it all out and burn it and do a big purge, and then find they can't,
and then join the SAS.
and then they find
I know, I'm just kidding.
That doesn't change things, and they end up doing it again, and it's a pattern that may repeat for a few years until they get proper counseling.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Just terrible.
Yeah, so how do people feel about trying to understand why they feel different? I think it's something that cisgender people can't understand.
Right.
Yeah, the idea that that you are not the gender that you are told,
Yes.
that you're supposed to be,
Yes.
that you look at your body and your body says it is that gender,
Yes.
and you can't stand it.
People
and,
think it's a choice, don't
and it's
they?
wrong. Yeah, it's not.
No, it's not.
And I think people whose gender is congruent really can't understand the dissonance
Yes.
where your gender is not congruent,
Yes.
because everything is kind of wrong, and people keep trying to rewire their brain to make it right, and it doesn't work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
It's very like that left-handed thing. If you're left-handed, you can keep trying to use your right hand,
Yeah.
but it'll always feel wrong.
Yes. That's a good example,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine, like as a cisgendered person, I can't imagine, Dee Dee, even though I've known lots of trans people in my life, I
Yeah.
cannot imagine having to deal with not only just everyday life, which
Yeah.
is hard enough, particularly for children,
Yeah.
and then to have to deal with that, not knowing what on earth it is, and
Yeah.
if they don't get any sort of information in school,
Yeah.
then,
And of
you
course,
know,
it complicates
how
all of your
disturbing that would be.
relationships and
Pardon?
stuff. It complicates all of your relationships.
Yes.
How do you be in a relationship with somebody as a gender that you feel you aren't?
Yes. Yes.
And it can be incredibly confusing, and is incredibly confusing
Yes.
for those people.
Yes.
And yeah, it's hideous.
Yes. Yes.
Which is why people transition. It's
Yes.
not because it looks like it's fun. I'll
No,
tell you.
and I mean, and as we've said, not everybody, like lots of non-binary people,
Yeah.
just are non-binary, aren't they?
Yeah.
They don't. There's no, and that's why
They
that
don't necessarily fit that binary
that
thing.
Luxander channel is actually very interesting for that,
Yeah.
because they
Very
actually
thoughtful
go
person.
through lots of questioning of this and that.
Yeah.
Cat Black has got some interesting stuff too. There's different
Yeah.
ones. I mean, we don't always agree with everything that these different
The
channels
different
say.
yeah.
ContraPoints is very interesting too. There are different
Wonderfully
channels.
introspective.
Who? Jamie Dodger,
yeah.
a trans man.
Yeah.
He's got some very interesting stuff. There's there's actually a lot more. I haven't really investigated all the different different trans
There's
and
lots
non-binary.
of them.
There's
There's
lots of them.
also right-wing
There's
trans
transmedicalist people,
There's-
which we're going to get to in a moment.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, the next question is, what's the difference between gender non-binary people and trans people? Is there a difference? How do we support trans non-binary people? Okay, I think I talked about this briefly in the beginning. There isn't a difference. Trans is an umbrella term. Transgender is an umbrella term, which basically means that you do not identify as the gender you were assigned at birth. And so that includes non-binary people, it includes binary people, it includes basically a lot of people. Now, there are some people called transmedicalists.
Which question are we up to now?
We're on 17.
Okay, yeah.
There are people called transmedicalists who basically assert that unless you are on kind of a medical path, that you're not really trans. And there's often been, I mean, in all of the time that I've associated with trans people and that kind of stuff, that kind of thing has existed. There's people who are, I don't know, they seem to think there's some sort of elite thing. But by and large, the trans community...
Oh, we skipped to the transmedicalist question.
Well, I'm kind of covering that in this.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's just is there a difference in...
Okay, I'll leave that to later.
Okay.
So basically, trans is a term that has come to be used. Transsexual was used ages ago.
Yeah.
Now, some people may still use that,
Yeah.
but it's generally seen as not correct,
Yeah.
or not a favored term.
Yeah.
Transgender is very open. How open it is somewhat in question. Some people prefer gender diverse. I
Yeah.
actually like gender diverse myself.
Yeah.
Because it's even more inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It includes genderqueer people.
Yeah.
It includes, people who are gender nonconforming. And it really, to me, the whole thing with gender, I will be very happy when I see rigid notions of gender dissolve,
Yes.
and people can talk about the gender the way they talk about their genealogy or their heritage.
Yes.
And if they are interested in that, they can talk about that, and they can, I, to some degree, identify as Scots because I have some Scots ancestry, but it's not my only ancestry.
Yeah.
Like anybody, I'm a mix of all kinds of things. People can see themselves somewhere in that.
Yes.
But it's a preference. It's not the way we judge people.
No.
We don't judge people by the way they identify in terms of their genealogy, which grandparents they identify with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, when gender just becomes another part of human diversity and human expression,
Yes.
I'll be happy.
Yes. And how do we support trans and non-binary people now?
I think by recognizing that they exist.
Yes.
By actually, like if somebody says
Just
they're
accepting.
non-binary, accept it.
Yes.
And you don't have to question it. You don't have any really right to question it.
No, and
They're
it doesn't make anybody lesser. Just like
soc-
marriage equality and all of that didn't take away from heterosexual marriage.
One of the worst things about all of this transphobia
Yeah.
is this notion that people get to judge, trans people.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay to transition?
Yes.
Are you transitioning the right way? Can you be trans if you're?
Yes. Suddenly everybody's got an opinion.
What right do you have an opinion
Yes.
about
But isn't that
anybody's
amazing?
life?
Suddenly
Yeah.
everybody has an opinion. They all
Yeah.
sort of like, suddenly everybody is interested in that.
Yeah.
I wish as many people were interested in ending these eternal wars
Yeah.
by U.S. empire.
Yeah.
I wish they were as interested in that as they are
Yeah.
in this issue. This
Yeah.
is amazing how many people who've never shown any... There are people that come in and... we've seen people that they just come out of the woodwork. It's
Yeah.
amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
To sort of say what they think should be happening
Yeah.
with somebody else. Anyway, go on. It's
Yeah.
just amazing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway, with non-binary people, one good way is if they prefer they/them pronouns, use them. And
Yes.
increasingly, for me, if I don't know what the gender of somebody is, I'll use they and them.
Yeah.
Because it's a gender neutral. It's
And-
not specific for non-binary people.
Yeah, and
It's
you're going
just
to make
neutral.
mistakes. I mean, I've even though I've known somebody's, gender or their pronouns, I've made. You can accidentally misgender people, and you just sort of like you correct yourself, and then you
And
go on. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that can happen.
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, if you're doing it intentionally to sort of, kind of make somebody feel
Feel bad.
bad,
Well,
that's a different
shithouse.
story. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. You'll have to bleep that bit out.
which one?
Shithouse.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we can't really.
Yeah.
But that's all right.
Okay. where are we? Why do trans people try to be passable? Natalie Wynn talks a little bit about that. And she said one of the main reasons she's a binary trans person. She's one of the main reasons she's concerned with being passable is because you get a lot less shit. You know, Kat Black talks about the fact that, you know, people online may abuse her and call her a man and all this sort of stuff. But she kind of lets that roll off her back because she knows that every time she walks out the door, she's seen as female.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's great if that's your situation.
Yeah.
And if that's your situation, in a sense, you've got a certain amount of privilege.
Yes.
Yeah. Because you get a lot less shit.
Yeah. And she's very open about her feminization surgery and all of that kind of thing that she's had.
And Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints, is very open about, well, one of the main reasons is she wants to socially be seen as female and accepted that way. Yeah. And so she's been, you know, really working it. Yes. And also, I think she likes femmy stuff.
Yes.
You know, you look at her house or how she dresses, she often dresses in really fancy, you know, kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was just trying to get her thing up, but I can't get it up, so I won't worry.
Anyway, she, you know, like...
Anyway, you can see... You
can go and have a look. I mean, one of the nice things about her is she's done an awful lot of work on anti-fascism. And, she's very political.
Yeah, ContraPoints.
And she's very left.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. So, she's
done some amazing work anti-fascist
She's got some problems with her leftist stuff, but anyway. So, Dee Dee, what else have we got here?
Okay. Anyway, people try to be passable.
Somebody
because
said, Dee Dee,
makes life
in the comment
easier.
section, Dee Dee.
They, them is plural. No, it's not. They, them is singular as well. Yeah. I'm not going to get into that. It's just not true if you look at linguists and people. Yeah.
I think somebody's got a problem, Dee Dee.
I think somebody's got issues.
Somebody's got issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's a transmedicalist and what's an example of that? Okay. I think that you were looking at one YouTuber, oh God, what's the name of something white? What's the name of that trans woman who's the right-wing one? She's a transmedicalist.
Yeah, and Blythe.
White.
Anna Blythe? No, that's the name of the premier in Queensland. Or was, yeah.
Yeah, she's
I don't
not
know,
trans
I can't.
and she's not, something white, anyway. Anyway, transmedicalist. Buck Angel is said to be a transmedicalist. I don't know if that's true. I haven't really heard what he said that way. Yeah. But there are certain people who say people who aren't on a medical transition path, particularly non-binary people, are not really trans.
I just want to point out something. Have you got a suggestion what you'd prefer this group of people to use? This is another example
Who's
of this they them comment.
Them. I mean, he's just carrying on.
I know, but
he's insisting it's third person plural, and it's just I'm not getting into that argument.
No, but I mean, like
true.
This is another example of somebody, a cisgendered person, telling a group of people what they should be doing, what they should be using.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's sort of Anyway, go on.
Yeah.
Go on.
I mean, if I say, where's Trish? Oh, they're in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
They're getting a cup of coffee.
I used to refer to my female partners as they and them just to avoid having somebody, kind of catch on about that I was having relationships with women. So it's sort of, that is something that I used to use all the time. I'd say, they'd say...
See that cup over there? That's Trish's cup. That's theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it'd be really good if you could maybe sort of. I mean, I can see that somebody in the chat has got a bit of a problem with
Yeah.
this and is
Where's
trying
Trish?
to
I
find
see
problem.
them. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. You
they're
know,
right over there.
let's try not to
Um,
be nitpicky. I don't want to
yeah.
use that speciesist term, but anyway, you know, there's bigger issues here than pronouns anyway, which is what the corporate media and a lot of people who are transphobic like to pick on certain things and make a deal out of them.
Yeah.
When they're not listening to the real important issues that people are dying and killing themselves
Yeah. And
because
Kim, you're
of
right. They, them has been
transphobia.
used as a singular term for people who gender is unknown for a long time. It's nothing new. And as I've just pointed out, they, them is used for people in a singular way all the time. I mean, where's Trish? They're over there. There they are.
Yeah, yeah,
That's them.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
People use that sort of language all the time. We just
Yeah.
don't think about it.
I'm more concerned about the motivation behind pointing things that.
Yeah,
like
the
that out.
motivation of questioning that
Yeah,
is just
okay.
really to negate non-binary people's
Yeah, yeah.
pronouns.
Anyway, let's go on.
Why is there a sudden increase in trans people? Are there more trans men than trans women coming forward, or vice versa?
Try to speak close in front of the mic. No, not closer, but pointing towards the mic.
Okay.
Dee Dee, sorry.
Yeah, it's hard to look over there and do that. I'm kind of angling in. Why is there a sudden increase in trans people? Are there more trans men than trans women coming forward, or vice versa? There's an increase in trans people because basically more people know about trans and see it as something they couldn't be. It's just like when being gay wasn't so anathematized and criminalized and all that sort of thing. A lot more people have come out as gay, and a lot more people have come out as bisexual. And, you know, like, that's been there a lot. And, of course, anybody working in sexual health, there's a whole classification of men who have sex with men. And those are people who see themselves as heterosexual and will declare themselves as heterosexual. They
Yeah.
just happen to have sex with men.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Anyway, so basically I think trans people are recognizing earlier it doesn't get to the point where they become suicidal when they're 30 or wherever and just can't deal with it anymore.
Yeah.
And when people know, when it becomes an option, it's like, why was there sudden increase in women wearing pants?
Yes.
Yeah. It's because all of a sudden it didn't become necessary to wear dresses or skirts.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
there wasn't that intense pressure. And then once there's not that pressure, well, pants are more comfortable. That's why virtually every woman in Tasmania wears pants. I mean, we live in a country town, and most women, it's kind of hard to distinguish them from dykes.
Yeah.
And they're not. They're good country girls, and they've got a husband and kids, and you know, they're just good country girls.
Yes. If you had any sort of gaydar, it wouldn't really work down here, would it, Dee Dee? Kind of.
Sometimes, but
Sometimes.
often not. Yeah, you have to tune it a lot finer. Okay, are there more trans men than trans women coming forward? I don't know. I think there's a lot more attention to trans women coming forward, and I think that's because for a long time, most of the trans people coming forward were trans women. And the reason for that is in part that the gender norms for men is so rigid that you see this real reaction in the people who just can't stand it. And they were the ones who came out initially with John Money but I mean, no, there were, like George Sand and people like that. George Sand always wore a suit, and were female. But even, in the 19th century, that was allowed. It was seen as eccentric. It wasn't seen as criminal.
No. Yes.
Yeah.
We should tell people, they should check out Gentleman Jack. Is it Gentleman Jack?
Gentleman Jack
Yeah,
is a
that's a
fabulous
TV
show.
series. I think
Yeah.
they've only done one,
And it's on the BBC. One
the first
season.
series, one season. So it's kind of fun, isn't it?
It's really fun, and it's about
Gentleman Jack.
basically
It's English.
probably trans, or either that or certainly very butch. I don't know. It's that situation where trans didn't exist at that time.
Yes.
They were somebody who was assigned female at birth, who insisted on wearing men's clothes and doing men's stuff and taking a man's role in almost everything.
Yeah.
And,
There's been a number of people like that in history, hasn't there, Didi?
Yeah.
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 And there's been
People
women
that died, even women that died
through that. A lot of that. There's been a number of women who fought in the Civil War and were discovered
Nobody
to
even
be women
knew,
when they got injured and went to hospital or something like that.
Or after they died.
Or after they died.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of those cases, but that was before transsexuals and transgender and the whole medical profession got involved.
Yeah.
Now, there were actually probably more women doing that kind of thing than men in earlier period. But there were always, like in Elizabethan England, there were the Molly houses, or in Georgian England, there were the Molly houses where gay men would dress as women. And how much are they gay and how much are they gender? I mean, it's like initially homosexual didn't exist as a word, and people were called, like Kraft Ebing referred to homosexual, what are now known as homosexual people, as inverts, because they were taking the role of the other gender sexually. And he saw it in gender terms. And if you look at a lot of gay stuff, the whole calling each other she, gay men calling each other she, and talking about, I just want to go shopping, and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's all gender stuff. That's not sexuality stuff.
No. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
How much homosexuality and gender stuff cross over, where they're distinct and where they're actually mixed. And it's questionable how much people who might have been gender diverse were, saw themselves as gay and had a role in gay society or lesbian society. And I think the thing with trans women coming forward now, or trans men coming forward now, is that up until fairly recently, I think a lot of people who were gender diverse and, didn't feel very female found, places within the lesbian community where they could be that and still be considered lesbians and women, on the very extreme edge. And I think particularly younger people now see being trans as a different and possibly a more authentic option. And I think that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing that increase in the number of trans men. And it's being reported as, all of a sudden, there's trans women, trans men are just overwhelming, everything. And it's not. I think there's still probably about equal numbers. It's just that previously there weren't equal numbers. I think it's just equalizing.
Yeah.
And there's not a lesbian erasure. There's plenty of lesbians.
Yes.
Because being gay and lesbian is also more permissible.
Yes.
And so a lot more people are, coming out as lesbian.
Yes.
So, in fact, there's a lot more lesbians than there used to be.
Yes. Yes.
Or a lot more out lesbians.
Yes. Yes.
Let's see. Last one. What's intersexed? Oh, my. Okay.
Or should we do that
In
as
this-
a separate one?
Well,
where
I'll
are
do
we
a
up to
very
now?
brief one.
Did he?
The last one.
Where?
21.
Okay. We've already done the sudden. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. The intersex question, I may go into that in more detail because it's actually a very complex issue.
Right.
And we talk about trans people, and trans people, a lot of their issue is trying to be accepted for their gender.
Yeah.
And for those who want some sort of medical intervention,
Yeah.
trying to get access to that medical intervention.
Yes.
Intersex people are people who are sexually neither male or female, although they may have been assigned male. In fact, virtually all of them are assigned male or female.
Yeah.
And for intersex people, a lot of them end up, if they have visible intersex conditions, visible variations in their genitals at birth, surgeons will often insist on doing surgery on infants. And this is often unnecessary surgery. And it's surgery that could easily be deferrable.
Yeah.
And it's certainly without consent or any regard to the actual gender of the child. So it's horrible. It's been described by a number of UN departments as tantamount to torture.
Yes.
The surgery that they do on infants' genitals often leaves them with all kinds of scarring and sexual dysfunction and other medical problems, and often necessitates a series of further surgeries as they grow.
Yes.
But the number of people who are visibly intersex at birth are relatively small. About, if I remember, it's 1 in 1,500. So that's not that many.
Yeah.
But the number of actual intersex people is something like 1 in 76.
Right.
Which is about the same as the number of people with blonde hair or red hair.
Right.
So the intersex people are actually about as common as redheads. A number of intersex people don't show that they're intersex until later in their life, often at puberty, where they develop differently than other people. Some intersex people don't show signs of being intersex until they try to have children. Some people who are intersex, it's never clear that they're intersex.
Right. Yeah.
Unless they do genetic testing.
Yes.
One of the things about trans people in sports, which has been a pet peeve thing of a lot of transphobes, is the Olympic Games and international sports from, God, what was it, 1936 or something, started questioning the gender of women athletes.
Yeah.
And I'll go into that more in the intersex talk, but one of the things that subsequently is discovered and is pretty clear at this date is that a lot of female athletes are actually intersex people. And a number of them are actually XY, and which chromosomally is supposed to be male, but they were assigned female at birth. They grew up as girls and women. They competed as women. They thought they were women. They got married as women and all that sort of stuff. And then they've done some genetic test and somebody said, you're actually a boy.
Right.
And
we're talking
fairly
about
common one
intersex,
is,
by the way. This is sort of different from the
this
trans.
is different than trans.
Yeah, we're just
intersex
talking
and
about
trans
this.
are two different issues.
Yeah.
It's like sexuality and gender identity. Sexuality is who you're attracted to. Gender is who you see yourself, and intersex is really about your biology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And intersex people can be trans or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can see themselves as the gender that they were assigned.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes they transition. And intersex people can be gay or not, or bi. Trans people can be gay, straight, bi. Anywhere in that, spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not even three choices. It's, all kinds of, gradations.
Yes.
And
yes.
the important thing to understand is that the biology is not simple.
Yes.
It's
yes.
not a case of you're either XY, XX, or you're XY.
Yeah.
That's often not true.
Yeah.
There are a number of other chromosomal configurations, but even that doesn't matter. I mean, there was a case in Hungary recently where they discovered somebody who was XY, a woman who was XY, SRY positive, which means they had the gene that normally produces masculinization, and yet they were female, looking and seeming, assigned female at birth, and they had a child who was also XY, SRY positive. Now, this is sort of really outside the bounds of what most geneticists and biologists would expect. It's an extremely, well, as far as they know, it's an extremely rare case. I mean, I say it's an extremely rare case. The problem is people don't get genetically tested.
No.
I mean, they've found a lot of female athletes are intersex in one way or another but those people were not seen as intersex when they started competing. Yeah. They were seen as women. They were totally accepted as women all of their life from birth onward. They were always accepted as women, and they were only discovered to be intersex or something else on genetic testing. And the thing is, most people are never genetic tested. You get the transphobes who go, well, you're your biological sex. Most people never, ever have their biological sex tested. When you're born, you don't have your biological sex tested.
No.
You're not given gene tests. Somebody looks between your legs and says, oh, well, that looks like,
Yeah.
I wanted
Misty
to
Ann
answer Misty
Yes,
Singh. She's asked
yes.
a question about the difference
Just-
between the word transgender and transsexual.
Yes.
transsexual was a term that was used medically in the 60s and 70s and 80s, less so into the 90s. I mean, I remember the debates in the 80s where some people talked about being transsexual if they were planning on going the full surgical, medical, genital reassignment route. And a lot of people talked about being transgender as being a more inclusive term for people who may not have wanted to do that. And while there were some people who said, well, you know, as if there's some process where, okay, you discover you're trans, you go to your psych things, you get your letter, you find a surgeon, you have your surgery, and then you're there. Yeah. Well, a lot of trans people found that was just bullshit.
Yes.
You know, they may have gotten there, but they're still left with themselves. And increasingly in the 80s, the received wisdom from most trans people was, if you feel organically that you must do something about this, if you feel so uncomfortable with your body that you need to change it, go ahead and change it.
Yes.
But if you don't.
Yes.
Because it has consequences. It's surgery. It's never going to be exactly what you want. It may have other repercussions. If you don't need to do it, don't do it.
Yes.
And I know in the 80s, people talked about transgender as being related to gender rather than that specific sex thing of trying to change sex.
Yes.
With genital surgery. And there was also, there was a more inclusive thing, and people also used T asterisk at that time.
Yes.
Which asterisk is a computerese thing for a wildcard character.
Yes.
And it was seen as including TS, which is transsexuals, TG, which is transgender, and TV, which is transvestite. Now, transvestite has fallen out of favor as a term. People tend to use cross-dresser. Transsexual has fallen out of favor as a term because, in some sense, you don't ever really change your biological sex. You're really changing your gender.
Yes.
And transgender is seen as a very inclusive term.
Yes.
And an umbrella term. Now, some of the non-binary people and the genderqueer people question whether transgender really applies to them. And there's a kind of even broader umbrella term that's starting to be used, which is gender diverse.
Yes.
And you will find some people
like that.
talking about sex and gender diverse people. I like gender diverse too. I mean, I'd rather have it be more inclusive because, after all, that identity covers all the people who get pointed at and abused.
Yes.
And that's kind of where it really comes down to.
Yes. Yes. Anyway, Dee Dee.
And why be elitist about it?
Yes.
There are a few people who still might refer, particularly people who may have transitioned in the 60s or 70s or something, who might refer to themselves as transsexual. That's probably historical more than anything else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, if any, I think I don't think there's any more questions, but thank you very much for dropping by and and checking out this live stream. And I hope that we'll probably in a couple of months we'll maybe do another one and see if.
And at some point I might maybe I'll do it on my channel. I don't know, on Intersex.
Yeah, we can do it on this and your channel, or you
or
can
do it on your
you
channel.
can copy it and put it on your thing, whatever you want to do, Didi.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, thank you so much. Thanks for.
Anyway, if anybody else has any questions,
Yeah,
I'm
just leave
more
them
than
in-
happy
just leave
to
them.
answer it now if anybody has any
Right.
quick ones.
Yes. If you do have any more questions, otherwise, please leave them in the comments section of this video, and check out the other video we did earlier today, which was about 7 or 8 hours ago now, about a Glenn Greenwald article, and we discussed whether or not there was some trans phobia in that as well. But we also talked about other issues in that. So. Anyway, so we'll wrap it up here now, and thanks so much for watching. This is Faint Signals from Vega. I'm Trish Roberts, this is Didi River, and we'll see you next time.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.